Hi, I'm Callie and welcome to my kitchen. In this video, I'm going to show you my flaky pie crust. This is a pretty easy recipe that's pretty versatile too. I use it for both my savory pies and my sweet pies. The only difference being a teaspoon of sugar into the pie crust for the sweet pies. I grew up not liking pies. I didn't like the pie crust. I would eat the filling but never eat the pie. When I was 17, I told my grandma I didn't really want a pie because I didn't like the pie crust. And she said, "Oh, baby, that's because I've been making it with store-bought pie crust. I'll make you a pie with homemade pie crust, and you'll like that pie." I said, "Okay, Grandma, if you say so." So she goes in the kitchen to show me how to do it. She throws some butter and some flour into a bowl, whips it up and does some kind of magic with her hands, rolls it out, takes a jar of apples out of the cabinet that she had canned from her yard, throws it into the bowl, tosses in some sugar, some cinnamon, and some butter on top, rolls another pie crust out, does some magic with a knife, and puts it in the oven. It was the best pie I'd ever had in my life. And I was a little mad. I said, "Grandma, you've been holding out on me. I thought I didn't like pie, y'all." If you try this recipe and you try homemade pie crust for the first time, you're going to understand why I was so upset. I'm still a little upset. She's been gone 10 years. This recipe in the baking world is known as a 3-2-1 pie crust. It's 3 parts flour, 2 parts butter, and 1 part water. A little salt for flavor and a little sugar for a sweet pie. Now that's by weight. I'm going to say repeatedly, when you're baking things, it is best to weigh your ingredients. I'm going to give you the measurements for if you're using volume, but it's always best when baking to use weight. For a 9-inch pie, or in this case a 9.5-inch pie, it's going to be 1.5 cups of flour, or 180 grams, and 1 US stick of butter, or this is about 110 grams. I'm using all-purpose flour, so you add enough water to make it look right, but I'm going to show you how to do that. It's really best to use pastry flour when you're making cakes or pie crust or any kind of pastries, but it's harder to find. In the grocery store, you can get cake flour, and it has less protein like pastry flour does, but it costs quite a bit more, but this is a great alternative. I'm going to use all-purpose flour and show you how to add the butter in to make it right. I'm going to start out by cutting up the butter. You want to cube your butter. You want your butter very cold. If you have a bench scraper, you can use that. I don't, because at home I either use a knife or a spatula because it's saved me money so far and it's worked. But I'm just going to take a knife and cut this in thirds long ways. This is actually softened up just a little bit while I was talking. It's best right out of the fridge. It's best and easiest right out of the fridge. I'm going to turn it and cut it in thirds this way. And then I'm going to cube it this way. And since it did sit out just long enough for all I was talking at the beginning of this video, it's just soft enough that I'm going to go ahead and put it back in the fridge. If you're not ready to put it in your flour right then, it's best to put it back in the fridge. I don't usually do the freezer because I don't want it frozen and I have a tendency to forget about things and get distracted doing other things, but I am going to go ahead and put this in the refrigerator. You can also measure your flour ahead of time and keep it in the refrigerator and have it really cold, especially if it's warm where you're working. I'm going to weigh this out. If you're scooping the flour, you want to scoop into the measuring cup and then level it out. And you're going to want 1.5 cups or 180 grams. You want 5 grams or 1 teaspoon of salt. If you're making this for a sweet pie, any sweet pie at all, you want to put a teaspoon or 5 grams of sugar in at this point. I'm going to flour my hands a little, pulled my butter out of the refrigerator. It's best to take a minute and break up your little cubes. It's really best to not have your butter sitting out when you cut it so that it doesn't start sticking to your knife and to each other, but if you did, it's okay. Just put your butter in the refrigerator till it's all hard, and then take a minute to break them all apart. Now I have all individual cubes of butter. I'm just going to toss the butter in the flour to coat each cube with butter. I'm just going to toss the butter in the flour to coat each cube with flour. There's pastry cutters, and you can do this with a food processor, but I don't own a food processor because I don't like dishes, and where would I put it? But also, I own a pastry cutter, and I think I've used it. I used it once 20 years ago. I find this really easy, and I'm going to show you all that magic my grandma did in that bowl with her fingers and why it looks like this when they're working. All you're doing is taking the butter that's covered in flour and pinching it and dropping it back into the bowl. And because it's coated in flour, it's not going to stick to your fingers. So you take and just pinch each cube of flour. You just take and pinch each cube of butter. You don't want to take them like this. You don't want to be picking up and squeezing because you don't want to squeeze it all together. You just want to squeeze each individual cube and press the flour into it. This one pie recipe doesn't take too long if you're working with multiple, like if you were doing a top and bottom crust, you could do it at once. It would be 3 cups of flour and 360 grams of flour and 2 sticks of butter or 220 grams of butter, in which case it takes a couple minutes longer. But this you should be able to do reasonably quickly before your butter gets too soft. Hey honey, how you feeling? After a couple of minutes, for flaky pie crust, you're going to want bigger pieces of butter, about the size of a pea, which actually I kind of started out with them about that big. So in case I missed any, it's already a good size. The more you mix it in, the less flaky it'll be. It's called mealy. If you're making a mealy pie crust, and that's okay. Sometimes you use a pie crust like that for something that you're going to have that's a really liquidy pie because it holds together better for the wet pie. For this, I want this flaky pie crust, so I'm not going to go any smaller than that. It's going to add a lot of little flaky layers into my pie crust. I'm just flipping through. I'm not pressing anymore. I'm just putting my fingers through to make sure I got all the big pieces. It's 3 parts flour, 2 parts butter, 1 part water. But it is all-purpose flour, so it's not going to be exact. We're just going to mix it until it looks right, and I'll show you how. I'm just going to pour a couple of tablespoons at a time and kind of mix it around my bowl. I'm not pressing, I'm just mixing in, flipping around the dry flour into the wet parts. Pouring a couple more tablespoons at a time. So here's the part where I can see where it makes some people nervous because you don't exactly know what you're looking for. You're afraid of overmixing. You don't want to overmix it because it makes that gluten form and then you'll have a tougher crust. You want it flaky. You want it perfect. Here's the thing about homemade pie crust. The pie crust is going to taste so much better than any store-bought pie crust you've ever had that you might not care. I personally don't. I think it turns out really good with a wide range of things. And if you can see, I've got bigger wads. I'm not pressing. I'm just flipping it around the dry flour and the wet flour together. And I think I've got a good amount. I've put probably close to half a cup of water in. And I'm just going to press it together. It is a little sticky, so I'm going to take the stickier parts and put them in where the dry flour is and press them together. I don't want to work it too much, but I will press it together. Get some off my fingers. Okay, I'll pull out some saran wrap. This is the part that if you've made a double recipe and you're making 2 separate doughs with it, you want to cut it in 2 and form the 2 separate doughs. It works best if you put this into the shape now, what you're ultimately going to want. If you're going to want a round pie and it's flattened out into a round pie, put it into a round, fairly flat disc now. If you want 2, 3, or 4 pies worth of pie crust out of this amount, out of this dough, separate it now. Weigh it and separate it now. And wrap it up. This is just for one 9.5-inch pie, or 1 9-inch pie. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up like this and shape it into a disc. It works best as a disc because it gets cold faster. You can't work with this until the butter's cold and hard again. If you get it flatter, it's going to get colder in the refrigerator faster. You don't want to completely press it out and mush all the butter together, but it does help you in the end and keep it from cracking. I've seen people make a ball and then have to work from the ball of dough they made. I've seen people cut this in half and then try and make 2 circles out of 2 half circles, and you just make it more difficult on yourself. Help yourself out now. Put it in the shape you're going to need it. If you're going to want a square to cut pieces and braid it, make a square now. This goes in the refrigerator for at least 20 to 30 minutes. If I'm using it for dinner, I do it before I start everything. I put it in the refrigerator. Once everything's ready, I can roll it out and start doing stuff then. So, which is what we're doing tonight. So this is going in the refrigerator now. This is one I did earlier. You can actually mix the pie crust and get it in the refrigerator the night before if you want, or the day before. This one was sitting overnight. I've got what we call bench flour. It's just flour for the bench. I'm going to spread this around everywhere. I'm actually going to get it all over my hands and all over this roller now and all over this board. I'm going to use this board. I find it easier for cleanup. If you've completely sanitized your counter and it's dry, you can always use your counter. I don't like to. I like to have this where I can move it, and sometimes I will put it in the refrigerator in this for the top crust. It just works easier for me. Sometimes I use a big pan that we have. We have a very big cookie sheet that I use. But today we're going to try this. Now, if you've never rolled out dough before, this is actually my grandma's rolling pin. So if you've never rolled out dough before, you don't want to take it and just go back and forth. You're going to roll with purpose. You're going to roll from the middle. Never have trouble until I'm recording. Roll from the middle and press out. The middle and press out. You don't want to roll in one spot and then find out it's stuck to the board. Keep it moving. Roll from the middle. Roll from the middle. And as you roll, you'll see places that are thicker than others. Go from the thick places to the thinner places. Press those thick places out. You don't just have to roll back or forth. You can roll around and get it how you need it. And if you can see all those big chunks of butter in there, this is going to be some very flaky crust. Starting to stick a little, so I'm going to get some more flour. If it starts sticking, stop, get it off the roller, flour that part. If you can tell, it's a little thicker here than it is here. We're going to roll this thick part out to the thin parts and out. The drawback of doing it on this board is that it limits a little how big I can roll out my dough, but my pan is not that big, so you can take your pan and see. I think that's well past my pan at this point. I go just a little more. You can go to a certain thickness. We actually really like the thick pie crust because this crust is so good. It's kind of our favorite part, or we like it as much as we do whatever filling I put in it. So I don't mind it a little thick. It will have to cook for a few minutes longer, but we're okay with that. I've scaled this recipe to pretty much fit my 9.5-inch pan without needing a whole lot trimmed and having it thick. And I think that's going to work great. So what you're going to do, I think this is what makes a lot of people nervous. Sometimes I'll put this here and slide it down, but what's best is to roll up your pie crust, put your dish in place, and roll your pie crust in. Now, I'm going to actually lift this and press the dough into the edges. You don't want to press the dough and stretch the dough right there. You don't want to stretch it because you don't want it to leak right there, which is going to cause it to fold on the sides a little, but that's okay. So if I had pressed it out further, you would just cut it off around it to the length you want. You can use scissors or a knife and just cut it off. We really like this pie crust though. So what I do is just fold it in. So you can fold it in all over. This is where you can get very creative. You can fold it in, you can take your fingers, and you can put one finger here and a finger and thumb here and press around the sides and get this, and I'll show you a picture where I've done that. It doesn't always look very pretty now, but once it's baked, it will look so good. This one I'm going to leave out. I'm going to put this up because this one I'm actually using for chicken pot pie, and it's going to have a top crust over it, and I want the top crust and the bottom crust to go together. So I'm going to put this in the refrigerator until my filling is ready. If you were going to blind bake this, after you've refrigerated it for about 20 minutes, you would take a fork and dock it. Take some parchment paper, put it in, make sure it's in the corners good, and pour a pound or two of beans, of dry beans in. As you can buy pie weights, but these are usually about $1 a bag, and these last for years. You can reuse them for years. Once you've done your sides and you have it just like you want it, and you've done the egg wash on the side, put it in a 425-degree preheated oven for 10 to 15 minutes. It depends on the thickness. Take it out. Take your pie weights out and put that back in the oven for another 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how brown you want it, and which is going to depend on how thick you got it. But this one is for chicken pot pie for dinner tonight, so I'm going to put it just like this into the refrigerator until my chicken pot pie filling is ready. And I'm going to do the other one because I'm actually making two. I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to get my pie crust out and get it divvied up in my pie crust. Since my filling is hot, I want to move as quickly and as efficiently as possible, because I need this pie crust to not melt. While my chicken was cooking, I went ahead and rolled out the tops of the pie crust and rolled them and put them in the freezer. So I have frozen dough now that I need to thaw for just a minute. I am doing a video that gives details on how to make the pie crust, my flaky pie crust. This is the savory pie crust with no sugar. Or maybe this part made it into the pie crust video. I don't know. Maybe you're watching the pie crust video. But I'm just going to give this just a minute to thaw because I had it in the freezer for too long. Because I didn't have room in the refrigerator. Well, shoot. I should have taken those out when I did these. Note to self, don't put them in the freezer for this long or take them out when you start doing the pies. Oh, I'm breaking it. I don't believe I did this. So, if you do put your dough in the freezer, make sure you take it out in time for it to thaw when your pie crust is ready. These are thawed now. This one has thawed now in places. If experience has taught me anything, it's that there is a wide range of screw-ups that you could do with homemade pie crust and it still tastes really good. So what I'm going to do is just press this together to seal it because I really just rolled it out just bigger than my pie pan, and I'm going to fold it under. We'll do it where you can see it. You see that? Well, where it's thawed, I'm going to fold it under. Because as I've said before, we really like this pie crust, and if it's thick in that place, we won't mind. This is the part of pie crust that you can get creative. If you want to push it together this way, if you just want to get it in the oven without it falling apart so you can eat, that's okay too. If you want to make it pretty, you have to work fast because it's melting with that hot filling. And if you take too long, it won't be very pretty. You can take a fork. You can do this number, which is actually my favorite. And apparently what I'm going to do because I'm doing it. Sometimes I start doing one thing and then I change my mind and do something else. Okay, I do that a lot. You press it down in so the top doesn't get burnt. It is coming out a little bit, and that's okay. It happens. This one's really going to be a mess. This one's thawed in places and melted in others. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to pinch this together, and I'm going to fold it under. I am actually going to take a fork on this one and try that. I don't want any pieces that are smaller than the others that will get burnt. I'm going to do 1 egg for an egg wash. A lot of times I don't do an egg wash. I've always thought it was a waste of an egg, but it really does make a difference for the finished product. Especially when you fussed over something as long as I have this pie tonight. I'm going to do an egg wash and make my pie pretty. Pies pretty. Ideally, you want to work a little quicker than I did tonight. And I could have worked a lot quicker with 1 than I did with 2. But I'm just going to put a few vent holes in here. And then we have a couple holes in it already. So if you don't, it will come out all over in places that you don't want it to. And then it won't look anywhere near as pretty. And you probably don't want to hit all the way to the bottom of the pan, forgetting that there's a crust in the bottom too. Alright, oven's preheated at 425 degrees. We're going to pop these babies in the oven. So something I should note that I neglected to do when I put my pies in the oven was put something under the pies because those crusts are very high fat content and dripped. And our oven has this flat bottom that where anything drips on it, it smokes. And when you put baking soda on a grease fire, it smokes some more. But my pies turned out pretty. My eyes and lungs burned a little, so we're going to continue to air the house out before we try my pretty pies. But just thought I should note that since I neglected to do that in the video. So we have the apartment cleared out a little now. It's important to know that baking soda puts out a grease fire, but my pies still look good. And dinner's ready. When I say there is a wide range of things that you can screw up with homemade pie crust and it still turn out good, I meant that. Got a mess to clean up, but that flaky crust I've got, we like the thick crust. Like, we really like the thick crust. We're in this for the crust. That crust, though. I just want to show you how flaky that crust is. Can you see that? If you liked this video, go ahead and give us that thumbs up. If you found it amusing, give us that thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. We hope to have more out to you soon. In the meantime, it's finally dinner time. Y'all have a good one. And y'all, what's up? Let's eat.